Top ministers, it's the Russian dude. There are moments when the fog around the long conflict thins just enough for people to glimpse a very uncomfortable truth. Not through secret documents or dramatic leaks, but through boring, repetitive official statements that suddenly stop adding up. Recently, Kremlin's longtime spokesperson Dmitry Peskov commented on yet another proposal for unconditional pause in the hostilities along the current front lines. This option has been floating around for months. Ukraine agreed to it, the biggest outside mediator agreed to it, and yet Moscow once again found a way to say no without actually pronouncing the word. Peskov basically wrapped the refusal in familiar language about consistency, consultations, and just well-known positions. I mean, you guys know what we want, so until you agree, we're not gonna talk to you. To a trained ear, it was just clear as a day. The leadership simply does not want the fighting to stop. But for millions of Russians, the message remains deliberately blurry. And that blurriness is not an accident. It is part of a carefully engineered information strategy designed to delay a very simple, very dangerous question forming in people's mind. If stopping the fighting is possible right now, why it is not happening? To answer that, we need to peel back layer after layer of excuses, substitutions, and rhetorical smokescreens that have been built to hide one core decision. And once you realize how this machinery of Russian propaganda works, it becomes impossible to just see it and think otherwise. To begin with, let's talk about how straightforward ceasefire is turned into something abstract, suspicious, and endlessly postponed. When Peskov says that Russia's position is well known and has been consistently adhered to, he's not providing information, he's actively removing it. This style of communication is designed to signal firmness while avoiding clarity. It allows officials to appear engaged in diplomacy while quietly blocking one step that would immediately change reality on the ground. For months now, the proposal has been remarkably simple. Both sides stop where they are, on a clearly defined date, along existing lines. No grand declarations, no ceremonial signing, just silence where there used to be constant noise. Simple as that. I mean, this is not a revolutionary idea. It is one of the oldest mechanisms for halting large-scale destruction in modern history. And yet, the Kremlin treats it as if it was some kind of reckless gamble bordering on surrender for them. The trick lies in how the refusal itself is framed. Instead of saying, "we do not want this," the narrative shifts towards complexity. There are supposedly too many unanswered questions, too many contradictions on the other side, too many risks to consider. The pause becomes something suspicious, even dangerous. And meanwhile, the fact that nothing prevents such a pause from being implemented tomorrow is quietly pushed out of the conversation completely. This linguistic maneuvering is not aimed at foreign diplomats. It is aimed inward, at a domestic audience that is increasingly exhausted. The goal is to keep people from realizing that what is being presented as an unsolvable puzzle is in reality just a choice, a simple one. And once that realization sets in, the next logical step becomes completely unavoidable. So to delay it, the language itself must do the heavy lifting. And to understand why this matters so much, we need to look at how rare these moments of honesty occasionally break through the fog, which leads us directly to the next chapter of this story. Every so often, a voice slips past the filters and says the quiet part out loud. Not a dissident, not an activist, but someone firmly embedded into the system itself. A talk show host, an anonymous war blogger, a brief segment that goes viral despite nobody intending it to. These moments are revealing precisely because they are not scripted to challenge the official line. When a Kremlin-friendly commentator casually refers to a ceasefire as a missed opportunity, it punctures the illusion that there was never a real alternative. When a pro-war channel admits that an immediate halt along current positions is both realistic and available, the entire narrative of inevitability starts wobbling. This is precisely why such moments are rare and short-lived, and once it happens in Russia, the Kremlin does everything possible to shut down completely as fast as possible. Because they contradict the foundational myth that Russia as a state has no say in this conflict. According to official messaging, individuals may choose whether to participate, but the country itself supposedly has no choice but to continue fighting. This framing serves two purposes at once. It masks the scale of coercion behind recruitment, while also absolving leadership of responsibility for prolonging the disaster. If the country has no choice, well, then there is no one who can be blamed for the consequences, right? The problem for the Kremlin is that reality keeps intruding. The front lines have barely shifted for a very long time. The costs keep mounting, and people begin to notice that their daily lives are deteriorating for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with distant towns they cannot even find on a map. Just two of them, maybe they know Avdiivka, Bakhmut, but that's it. They do not need new territories. They need affordable loans, stable prices, and some confidence in their own future. And when those needs clash with official silence about why a pose is being rejected, frustration starts seeking an outlet. This is exactly why Kremlin invests so much energy in controlling not just the facts, but interpretations of these facts. And the most effective tool in that effort is turning a ceasefire into something else entirely. Which brings us to the next chapter, where we will break down how peace itself gets redefined beyond completely anyone's recognition. By the way, guys, before we proceed, if you also want to see an additional chapter at the end of each episode and support our work, support the channel, you can do so by becoming our Patreon members. The link is down below. Thanks much. Now let's continue. So yes, one of the most effective ideas in this entire information campaign is the deliberate merger of two very different concepts. A ceasefire and a comprehensive peace agreement are treated as if they were inseparable. The public is repeatedly told that stopping the fighting requires settling every single dispute, drawing every single border, and resolving every single grievance first. This is presented as common sense for some reason. In reality, just a historical nonsense. Countless conflicts have ended their active phases long before diplomats finalized the paperwork. Sometimes that paperwork even took decades, sometimes it never happened at all. Just look at North Korea, South Korea. And yet normal relations kind of resumed, travel resumed, trade resumed. Well, once again, not for North Korea, but well, you get the idea. So by insisting that a pause is impossible without a grand settlement, the Kremlin creates a convenient paradox. Officials can speak endlessly about their desire for peace, while ensuring that peace remains perpetually out of reach. The longer the list of prerequisites, the safer the status quo becomes. And for an audience not accustomed to understanding diplomatic language, the distinction is very easy to miss. Because peace sounds reassuring, peace treaty sounds official, but in this context they represent opposite outcomes. One stops the immediate damage, the other delays that stop indefinitely. In addition to that, simpler manipulations are also deployed. A false just binary is offered, this or that. Continue fighting or accept humiliation. Nothing else, nothing in between. Any alternative is framed as weakness. At the same time, Ukraine's current position is quietly ignored completely in favor of outdated statements from years ago. This creates the illusion that the other side is inflexible and unreasonable, even when it has publicly accepted the very option Moscow rejects. Through repetition, the audience is nudged towards blaming everyone except the decision makers sitting in Kremlin, who hold the final say. And all of this, as you might have guessed, serves just one single purpose: preventing people from asking why an obvious, immediate step is not being taken right now. Because once that question gains traction, the entire structure starts shaking. And to keep it from collapsing, the narrative must become even more elaborate. Which leads us straight into the tangled web of propaganda itself, something we will talk about in our final chapter. Propaganda does not always aim to convince. Sometimes its goal is simply to exhaust, to overwhelm the audience with so many overlapping explanations that clarity feels impossible. Over time, this system has learned that a growing share of Russians want the fighting to end, so the messaging adapts. Instead of glorifying expansion like it was in the beginning, it now emphasizes supposed efforts to secure peace. I'm sure you exactly heard what I'm talking about. The leader is portrayed as tirelessly working behind the scenes, surrounded by obstacles created by hostile outsiders. If the fighting continues, it is not due to a lack of will, but because the process allegedly too complex to just rush. We need to think about everything. This message is delivered differently depending on the audience. For those already weary, official outlets highlight distraction and suffering, but redirect responsibility outward. For hardliners, commentators openly dismiss the idea of stopping, while momentum is claimed to be still existing. These contradictions are not a flaw, they are a feature. Different stories for different listeners, all leading to the very same outcome: continuation. At its core, this strategy relies on overcomplication. Simple demands are buried under hypothetical scenarios. What about disputed regions, they say? What about future governance? What about international reactions? Each question is framed as a blocker, even though none of them require active fighting to address. They can all be discussed after silence replaces chaos. But silence is precisely what is being avoided. The leadership understands something fundamental about public opinion. Once a simple idea takes hold, it becomes powerful. The idea that the fighting could have stopped months ago and still can, and it's very dangerous because it strips away excuses. It turns abstract suffering into a ledger of avoidable losses, and that is why the narrative keeps spiraling outward, inventing new and new complications to obscure a straightforward reality. Imagine for a second waking up in Russia to the realization that months of hardship, fear and decline were not inevitable. That a return to something resembling normal life was within reach, but deliberately postponed. This is the realization the Kremlin works hardest to prevent. Not because it lacks diplomatic options, but because clarity would demand accountability. Ending the fighting does not require solving every problem overnight. It requires one decision on one day to stop. Instead, millions are fed a diet of confusion designed to turn a simple demand into an unspeakable one. The longer this continues, the higher the price becomes, not just in abstract numbers, but in damaged lives, drained resources, and lost time that will never come back. And yet, the answer remains unchanged. The path forward exists, it is known, and it is being avoided. For as long as Putin lives, unfortunately it is highly unlikely we will see the total end of this war as we know it. And you guys, if you want to keep breaking down how this machinery works, how narratives are built to hide decisions, and what all of this means for ordinary people caught in the middle, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. There are many more layers to uncover, and many more uncomfortable questions to ask in the videos ahead. Thanks much for watching. If you want to support our work, please make sure to check our Patreon, link is down below. Thanks much, see you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway.